It's fall. You can probably tell that by this fall blooming clematis that's behind me. It's a huge bush now, and there used to be a lilac back here, but the clematis is so heavy in fall it actually bends the branches right down. Anyways, it's fall. It's time to start doing fall cleanup. But what should you do in the fall? Should you clean your garden? In this program, I'm going to discuss the pros and cons of fall cleanup. I'll show you what I do, and I'll also explain why there's certain things you should do in fall and other things you shouldn't do. So historically, people come along in fall and they cut all the vegetation of their perennials right down to the ground. Even things like this clematis back here would be cut down and the vine would be taken away. Here's one of these grasses, we might cut that down to the ground. We want to clean everything up. The leaves are falling from the trees, but hey, we're going to rake those up and get them out of the garden. We want the garden to look as clean as possible. Aesthetically, it does look pretty nice that way. From an environmental point of view, it's the absolute wrong thing to do. 8 out of 10 insects are beneficial insects. Now, we always talk about the pests, so you might get the feeling, well, there's more pests than beneficials, but that's not true. 8 out of 10 and maybe even 9 out of the 10 of the insects around are beneficials, and we need to keep them in our garden over winter so that they're here next spring to take care of the pests. They need a messy garden to live in. That's how they overwinter. A lot of that rubbish that's on the ground, all those leaves and twigs and things, that's where they hide over the winter. That's how they keep warm. A lot of grasses that have thicker stems, they're kind of hollow in the middle, and insects burrow in there and they live there. A lot of our native bees hide inside empty stems. If we cut all these to the ground, they have no place to go. So from the insect's point of view, we have to leave a messy garden. The more stuff you have laying on the ground, the better it is for the beneficial insects. And if you take care of them, they'll take care of your pests next summer. It's as simple as that. That's how nature works. Now, if you have some doubts about that, just go for a walk in the woods or in a field and see what happens with nature. Nobody rakes the leaves. Those leaves have a purpose on the ground. There's also a benefit for the plants. So a lot of your perennials will drop the leaves and stems right over top of the crown of the perennial. The reason for that is that it protects it in winter. If we cut everything away, we've got these open fields in our garden. And then it snows and the wind comes and the wind blows the snow away and they're bare again. That looks really great. It's not good for the perennials because they're now exposed to the cold air. On the other hand, if you leave them alone, what the plant does is all those old leaves fall down and covers the crown. And now when it snows, the snow goes in and gets stuck in those leaves and in those stems. The snow actually accumulates right above the crown of the perennial. Snow is one of the best insulators of heat that we have. And so it traps heat in the soil. The crowns of your perennials are warmer under all this leaf litter than if you clean it up. All right, so I hope I've convinced you. Don't clean up in the fall. Well, that's not a great idea either. So what I'm going to do in this program is I'm going to take you around my garden and show you some things. And in particular, I'm going to focus in on a number of things that you should clean up in the fall. Right here, I have a clump of allium. And these are flowering late in the season. They're pretty much finished. A few clumps are still flowering. These are finished. They're making seed heads. This might be Allium racemosa. Beautiful plant. The problem is that it makes seeds. And these seeds will spread all over this garden. And if I leave them, I'll have alliums all over the place here. Now that's not true of all alliums, but it is true of this one. So what I do here is I come along and I top them. Just snap these off. That way I'm not going to have a whole bunch of seedlings. Now, do you need to deadhead everything? No. In fact, I find that 90% of the perennials either don't make seed, or the seed that they do make doesn't germinate very well in my garden. Now, I mulch with wood chips, and so seedlings do have trouble getting going. Or maybe I'll get 1 or 2 seedlings, and that's fine. That just gives me a few extra plants to give away to friends. So 80% of the plants, they don't get deadheaded. there's no need for it. But I know this plant needs to be deadheaded. The coneflower is another one that does make a fair amount of seed. And I do get seedlings here and there, but it's not a big problem. Not a lot of seedlings, so I'm not too worried about the seeds. If I do have a plant somewhere that I don't want, it's easy to pull out. It has a fibrous root system that's fairly shallow, and I can pull that out, so I don't worry about these. There's a second reason I don't deadhead coneflowers. These guys make fairly large seeds, and the finches love them. Remember all those songbirds that have been working for you all summer long, eating all those bugs? Well, now it's your turn to feed the birds. They have trouble finding food in the fall and during the winter. So leave as many seed heads as you can. This is bird food, and it's free bird food. And the birds will stay in your garden, and next year, they'll take care of your pests. This is a big clump of bear's breeches. It's a beautiful plant that's a real showstopper in the middle of summer. But it has a couple problems. The first problem is that both the flowers and the seed heads have thorns. It's actually the bracts that have the thorns, and they're very, very sharp. So be careful when working with this plant. The particular plant I grow here is Hungaricus, and even though the leaves look kind of spiky, they're actually really soft. This plant has a large taproot. It's really hard to dig out. It's kind of like a dandelion. You know how when you cut the top off a dandelion, it just regrows, and you cut it off and it regrows? Same with this one, except the root system's even bigger. So I don't let this one go to seed in the garden. Once the seeds start forming, and they're pretty big seed heads, I cut them off and get rid of them. If I don't do that, I have a big maintenance problem in the garden. The other plant that's like this that I deadhead religiously is the yucca. Love those things, but boy, those seedlings are hard to get out of the ground. Seems like the root goes straight down, and no matter how hard you try, you can't get it all out and it regrows. So those are two examples of plants that I always deadhead. Now the plant itself has a lot of leaves here, and there's no reason to cut those back. Just leave them in the garden. They'll die back all on their own. I'm standing in part of the garden that's very shady. Above me are some very mature sugar maples. Below me is a lawn. Behind me is the actual flower bed. I see a lot of memes online that say, when the leaves fall, just leave them. They're good for your garden. And that advice is really good. So when the leaves fall back here in the flower bed, I just leave them. But out here in the lawn, they cause a problem. Never leave leaves on the lawn in winter. You have to do something with them. Now, if you have a small amount of leaves, then just cut your lawn, and as you're doing that, you'll chip up the leaves, and they'll add mulch to the garden. But if your layer of leaves is thicker like it is here, by the time all these trees lose their leaves, we'll have 6 inches of leaves here. You can't mow that and cut it up and leave it. It's still too thick. You have to remove it from this area and move it into some other flower beds. So how do you know how much is too much? Well, it's really quite simple. This is a cool growing grass. What that means is that it grows when it's cool. So fall, spring, and winter, it's actively growing. It needs sun to grow. So if you can't see the grass, there's too much litter on your lawn. If there's a little bit and you cut it up, and when you're finished mowing it, you can't see it, you see the grass, you see the green stuff coming through, that's okay. If there's so much that is covering the grass and the sun is no longer getting to the grass blades, that's too much and you have to do something about it. I've actually made a video on this area to show you what happens when you leave them too long and how much damage it will do to your lawn. Don't listen to the advice online. Do not leave leaves on your lawn, but in flower beds it's just fine. In fact, over to the right of me, I have a flower bed there that gets a ton of leaves. I mean, I'll have 8 inches of leaves on there. It pretty much covers all the perennials that are in that bed, and that's fine. I find that a thick layer of leaves doesn't seem to harm the perennials. But early spring, very early spring, I come along with a rake and I rake most of those leaves off. So I'm down to maybe 2 inches of leaves. 2 inches is just a good mulch, and the perennials will grow through it. 8 inches, though, is too thick, and it may suffocate some of those plants. The other thing we have in this climate is a very wet winter, and too much moisture gets under the leaves, and so it can rot out some of the crowns of these plants. So in winter, leave them, it's protecting them, but in early spring, rake some of them off, not all of them. And the excess can be put in your compost pile or put in some other beds that don't have enough leaves. Let's have a look at another garden area where I don't leave the leaves. This is one of my many rock gardens. I really like the small plants, but small plants can be a problem. If I get too many leaves on here, the leaves are huge compared to the plants, and they'll suffocate these plants. The other thing is that a lot of these are alpine plants, and in the wintertime they like to be quite dry. And that's not the climate we have. We tend to have a very wet winter. So if I leave the leaves on here, it keeps the crowns too wet and covers them too much, suffocates. So in a rock garden, it's a really good idea to remove most of the leaves, at least the larger ones. Now, small leaves are fine, but the large ones should be taken off. And so I do take the time to clean up this area and get rid of the leaves. As far as all the other beds go, shrub gardens, perennial gardens, sunny, shady, doesn't matter. Just leave the leaves there. In fact, I have a tendency to even rake them from the lawn into the bed. Although that's a lot of work, so to be honest, I usually just run the mower over everything when I'm cutting the grass, and that takes care of the leaves. Don't you just love these grasses? I probably grow about 40 different kinds of grasses, and I love them all. In general, I leave them all up. One of the reasons is that these things look really nice in the wintertime. Most of these stems are strong enough, they'll take a fair amount of snow. And you get this snow-covered stems, they look really nice. But there may be a reason to cut some of these back, but you cut them back in a special way. If you're growing a lot of miscanthus and you're in a slightly warmer climate, so let's say zone 6 and warmer, miscanthus have a habit of self-seeding a lot. So you might want to cut them back to stop the seeding. Now what I found that so far in zone 5, these seed heads never mature before winter, and so we don't get a lot of seeding here. But we're just on that border. And as the climate gets a little warmer, I'm noticing these are getting closer and closer to making viable seeds. So I think in the future, these may be a problem for us. Now there's a couple things you can do. First of all, you can get rid of these plants and replace them with newer cultivars that don't form seed heads. The other thing you could do is come along in fall and cut them back, but don't cut them to the ground. All the flowers are sitting at the top here. So you only have to cut off the top 8-10 inches of this plant, and that gets rid of the seeds. The rest of the plant and the leaves can be left as is. And the easiest way to cut these back is with hedge trimmer. And in fact, I use that to cut most of my things back either in fall or in spring. Don't use those little pruners. They're far too small. Hedge trimmers are nice and large and get through this in no time at all. By the way, here's some other advice. One of the main jobs in fall for the gardener is to go shopping. Right now, everything in the nursery is on sale. They want to get rid of their plants so they don't have to take care of them all winter. You can pick up a lot of bargains right now. Bring them home, and if you're not ready to plant them out, just sit them in your vegetable bed. Bury the pots so the soil level is up to the top of the pots and leave them there for the winter. Then next spring, plant them wherever you want. Fall is one of the best times to buy plants. This Sambucus is a beautiful plant, but as you can see, it's gotten a little too big and these branches are sticking out over the pathway. So should they be cut back this time of the year? And the answer to that is no. Don't do any pruning on woody shrubs or trees until late winter, very early spring. If you make cuts now, they may not seal off in time for winter, and then they stay open all winter long. So it's best to do all the pruning in late winter. Now, if you see a damaged branch, that's different. Whenever you see damaged wood, prune it right away. All the other pruning, that's a spring job. Oh no! Mushrooms in my garden! What do you do about mushrooms? Most of the mushrooms in a garden are just fine. They're not poisonous, they're not harming anything. It's just nature doing her thing. The mushrooms that you see above ground are the fruiting bodies of the actual fungus. The fungus is underground. And as many of you now know, the more fungus in the soil, the healthier it is. So when you see mushrooms like this, don't worry about them. This tells you that you have healthy soil. Just leave them alone. They'll make spores and spread around, and you'll have even more fungus next year. I'm standing here beside a rare tree. It's called Prunus marianjarvi. It was brought back from Asia, and we're still not quite sure what the species is, but it makes very unique flowers. I've been trying to propagate this for a number of years without too much success. So one of the jobs you can do in fall is propagate your woody plants, trees and shrubs, by taking cuttings. Now at this time of the year, they're mostly woody cuttings, so you have to treat them that way. But you can take cuttings now and root them over the winter. The process is a bit slower than taking cuttings next spring and early summer, but you're starting 6 months earlier, so it ends up being about the same length of time. So propagating your plants this time of year is a good idea. I found some red berries in a patch of perennials. These are the fruit of Jack in the Pulpit. The plant has died back, but the fruit is still very visible. Fall is a great time to collect seeds. If you want to propagate any of your plants, go through the garden and start harvesting the seeds. In this case, the fruits are nice and ripe, and they could be collected now. I've also left them till spring and collected them then. Either one works just fine. The problem with leaving them is that there are rodents in the garden that come and eat these, and I'm not sure if it's the chipmunks or the squirrels, but someone will come along and eat these. So if I really want these, I better take them right now. Jack in the Pulpits are part of the Eracema family, and they're quite easy to grow from seed. So that's pretty much it. There are a few other jobs that you could do. Have a look at your garden and see if you have to replace any of the mulch. Mulching in the fall is a great idea, especially if you use wood chips. In the spring, all the gardeners are looking for wood chips, and there's an abundance of gardeners and not nearly enough wood chips. So it's hard to get them from arborists. But in the fall, the arborists are still busy cutting down trees and chopping them up. And gardeners don't want the wood chips. So if you're getting free wood chips from arborists, now's a great time to do your mulching. This is also the time of the year where I go through my garden and I make notes about the things that I want to move next year. I find plants move better and divide more easily if I do it in spring. So at this time of year, I just make notes. Identify the plant, its location, what I want to do with it. Then I'm ready to go in the spring. There's one last job for the fall garden, and that is to get ready for winter. And one of the best ways to do that is to order yourself some books. And there's some great gardening books. Now, if you'd like to order any of my garden science series of books or my pond book, you can order those directly from my publisher and get a 25% discount. The details for that will be in the description and show notes. It's almost Christmas and you have to buy gifts anyways. You might as well order a whole bunch of books and give all your friends gardening books. Thank you for supporting me, and I'll continue making good gardening content with your support. Thank you very much and happy gardening.